Gremlins. Hello. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ruby Christine Head, co-founder of Life Camp, and you are here with me and
Star Rose Bond, clinical licensed psychotherapist and trauma-informed coach.
Yes, also not a
co-founders of Life Camp.
Yes, exactly. Co-founders of Life Camp. So we are here today to talk about intimacy and relationships and to get some sharing happening.
All right. So let's jump in. So I know that this is like a proverbial eye candy topic, because what we know to be true about trauma is that anybody who's got it tends to struggle in a few different universal areas, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, socioeconomic background, etc. We know that one of the major themes that people often struggle the most with is relationships, intimacy, and just their overall capacity to be in love. And so we want to talk about some of the more insidious and some overt and not so overt ways that trauma does creep into a relationship, and also talk about some of the things that we can do to pivot and curb that. So first and foremost, let's start off with sort of the way it shows up. Sorry, hold on. I need a little water. Give me a second. I was eating kale chips before this, and it's noticeable now. So some of the ways that it oftentimes shows up, and we don't always recognize it as, problematic. We just kind of look at it as like, oh, I'm in a toxic relationship. We hear terms like that, or I'm in a dysfunctional dynamic, or, maybe they're just not that into me. So some of the things to look at is, number one, feeling chronically disappointed. And this oftentimes comes with having a lot of expectations in the relationship. And when we use the term expectations, that usually is referring to this idea that if you don't do X, Y, Z, either you're fucked or I'm fucked. So it's a level of dependability on this other individual for them to be something so that you can be okay. We're going to get to the expectation pieces here in a minute. So that's number one shitty component. Some of the other ones are, and we see this oftentimes in all genders, but having it's one side of the spectrum or the other, either feeling really needy and insecure, and oftentimes it comes off as clingy. And this comes from a fear of rejection or a fear of loss, or even a fear of cheating, right? So it's this chronic kind of anxious or nervousness around what happens if the attachment gets threatened. Another part of this on the other side of the spectrum is sort of like avoidance, this inability to get close to somebody, not being able to open up, not being able to share vulnerability, because for the same reason, it's that fear of rejection, it's that fear of getting hurt, it's the fear of loss. So it's the same motivation, but it oftentimes manifests differently. The other thing that we see, and this is probably one of the most detrimental things that people do, and again, we're going to share a little bit more on this, is throwing out the breakup card every time you get into an argument. And this is something that's super commonplace in relationships, and it's incredibly destructive, because there's actually, above and beyond, there's a lot of relationships. A relationship can withstand a lot of shit, believe it or not. It can withstand dishonesty, that can be corrected, even infidelity, even, traumatized backgrounds, and, a bad track record in relationship. Like, relationships can really withstand, heal, and correct. But one thing that it can't survive on a regular basis is the constant threat of abandonment. And this is probably one of the number one things that really jeopardizes a relationship. So to take note of that. Also fishing. And this is fishing for insults or fishing for compliments. So it's that idea where you play a little games to see if the person is interested. Maybe you make the person jealous. Maybe there's some manipulative dialogue just to kind of gain their attention or where they're at with things. And this might seem pretty benign, like, oh, I'm, strangely flirting, or this is just part of the, cat and mouse game. But actually, it really creates a lot of burdensome energy and taxing dramatic energy on the relationship. So we want to avoid this at all costs. Efforts to increase jealousy, which is something that I just kind of was tiptoeing around too. And again, this goes with that fishing component. When we don't feel connected to ourselves, or we don't feel secure in ourselves, we will often rely on other people to feel good about ourselves. And one way that we unfortunately do this is we will manipulate a situation to see, are you really into me? Do you really care? Let me cause a situation or scenario to possibly threaten the dynamic and see how you react. That shit is dramatic as fuck. And I can also tell you, it completely degrades the fabric of the relationship over time. And some of the more obvious ones are cheating, dishonesty, you know, sort of feeling unable to open up, like we talked about before, blaming, chronic defensiveness. These are some of the more overt ways that trauma shows up, not willing to take accountability for the way that the relationship is taking, you know, kind of taking course. Because the truth of the matter is, although one person may be acting out of alignment or acting out in some capacity, there really are two individuals in this dynamic, and one may be behaving in a certain way and the other person is allowing, and vice versa. So we really want to step away from this blame victimization scenario. And that's not to say that in extreme scenarios there is dysfunction and there is abuse, and we will speak to that at another point in time. But by and large, we really want to step away from this idea of you're responsible for how I feel and I'm responsible for how you feel. Because for as long as we stay stuck in that pattern, ultimately what we end up doing is we end up playing the blame game. You want to add to some of this, Ruby?
Yeah, so for those of you joining us, we're talking about how trauma shows up in your relationship. So a lot of these things are things that people just think are, oh, this is common in relationships, or these are, you know, this is just one of the troubles I have. But what we want you guys to come away with is that it's not just that these are challenging things in relationships. They're often there because of some trauma that's residual in you. So like your nervous system is wired to the trauma, your reactions. And so you're not actually acting out of your full self in this moment. Those actions are based out of things that happened in the past. And now this is how they come out in the moment. So when we work to heal the trauma, we actually can stop to break some of these cycles. So what we're really highlighting now is all the ways that trauma can show up in your intimacy. So if any of this is, you're like, whoa, I feel called out, or like, oh my God, that's me, not to worry. These are all, they're actually very common, and they're part of these things that we experience. And so we want you to let you know that in the healing process, we can change and shift our responses and reactions, so we're no longer having trauma show up in our intimacy. All right, so a few more we want to go over is like constantly blaming, like someone else is at the fault for what's happening. Like, it's never me, it's always this person, or you, or like you always this, right? That anytime you find yourself saying you always or you never, I want a little like light to go off in your mind. That's like, whoa, I need a pause here, right? Because now we're stuck in an old pattern, being really defensive when in the relationship, right? When someone like says something about you, instead of just having a willingness or openness to like, oh, notice they said this thing, right? I'm like defensive, and I need understanding. I need to tell you why I'm right. I need to prove myself. I need to prove my worth. I need to make sure you understand, right? So all these things are different ways that trauma shows up. And also the pretending to be someone else, right? Not who you are, right? When you're not sure that you'll be loved and appreciated for who you are and how you are, it often means like showing up in relationships slightly different. Maybe it's like pretending to eat the food you don't like because you think the other person will like you more. Or maybe it's not being honest about, maybe you have a deep desire to have children or to not have children, right? And so you're not saying that, but you're basing your responses on how the other person feels. So maybe you're being really inauthentic to something deep down inside of you. Another way that it shows up is where intimacy can feel super scary, just all around, like getting close, or the closer you get with someone, the more tense and fear that builds up, and uncertainty, and sort of this like, whoa, okay, not this gotta go, right? Like exit stage left, no intimacy, right? Can really bring up tenseness, and it can feel really scary. Also, the inability to open up and share deeply. You know, often in relationships, one of the things we really want is to get to know the other person. And one of the ways trauma can show up is when someone's like, hey, I really want to get to know you, and they're asking questions, and you just find yourself kind of locking up, not being willing to share, not wanting to share personal details, feeling uncertain about it, or even often scared and not safe there. And so these are really big ways. Also, constantly worrying about cheating or the other person leaving. This goes back to what Star said at the beginning, like throwing out the breakup card. Constantly worrying about cheating or someone leaving is like always having your nervous system in fight or flight mode. What we mean by that is like, imagine like you're in a relationship and there's a hungry tiger in the room with you who wants to eat you all the time you're in the room with your partner, right? It would be scary if there was a tiger in here and it's like, rah, I want to eat you. You'd be like, your heart would be pounding. You'd be a little bit panicky. You would be wondering where you could run. You might be shifty, right? This is what we mean, like, is a biological action that's happening in your body when these things come up.
I want to
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
around that is super important one, and to highlight what you're saying. When we create these patterns, right, now we are physiologically reinforcing this dynamic. So if you're in a partnership where every time you bring up, what are we going to eat tonight? Or what are we going to do this weekend? Or did you help the kids out with homework? Or whatever is your triggering conversation. Maybe it's something to do with sex or work or, just overall intimacy. What happens is the more you continue to re-trigger that argument or kind of show up in the same space at the same time, then what you're doing is you're physiologically entraining yourself over and over from a neurobiological perspective to show up like that each time. So what that further means is even when you try to break the habit because consciously you shouldn't be doing this shit, or like, oh, I want to try something better, or I don't want to react that way, what happens is you train your biology to be in fight or flight mode during these specific triggers. So then your physiology is constantly reinforcing these types of moments. So they sort of work in tandem. Your mind and your behaviors are doing one thing, and now you're physiologically reinforcing these outcomes as well. And this is where shit gets weird. And this is where you hear people say, no matter what we do, we keep getting stuck in patterns. Or, you know what, like we keep fighting about the same shit over and over again. You're not crazy. You're not ridiculous. You actually have biology that's kind of working against you instead of for you at this stage in the game.
People often want to jump into, maybe my relationship's broken, or it's not going to work, or should I stay, or should I go? And really what we want to get to is like underneath all that is exactly what Star's talking about, is like we have biological patterns and responses that are connected to our feelings and emotions and how and who we are in the world, right? So you can keep changing relationships, right? But tell me if I'm right here. Have you had multiple relationships? And it's funny because the same problems keep coming up again, right? We're not saying stay or go. Like that's actually not the conversation. What we're really wanting to look at is how is trauma showing up in your relationship now? And if it's in this one, it's probably going to show up in every single one after this. So let's back up, go here to self and look at that and these pieces so that we don't keep recapitulating these same things. We can actually heal at a deeper level. That's like part of the bigger work Star and I do in Life Camp, is we really reset the biology, the nervous system, the brain, and your emotions and physical responses so that we unpair these things and you can have a new default in your relationship. If you guys have questions, thank you for joining us. We are talking about how trauma shows up in intimacy. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments. We are keeping an eye on them and we would be happy to get to them. Star, you want to get to the next part?
Sure. So we wanted to highlight, there's a lot of shitty things that people could do in relationships, but we really wanted to cover the top 5 big mistakes that couples make. And again, I want to revisit the very first thing I said for those of you who are jumping on late. First one, remember, a relationship cannot withstand a repeated offense of threatening to leave the relationship. And now I want to make the exception for, of course, if you are in an abusive relationship, if you are in harm's way and you need to get out and go, right? But we're talking the run-of-the-mill sort of relationship that has habits and patterns, some level of dysfunction maybe, and maybe just some sticky scenarios. A relationship cannot continuously be confronted with, I'm leaving, I'm out, I'm not doing this anymore, shut the door, we're done. And then just to revisit, we're back together again, 15 minutes later, 2 days later. It breaks down the fabric of the relationship and it becomes incredibly hard to repair over time, more so than any other feature or element around intimacy, to be quite honest with you. So some of the other ones that we're going to highlight, number 1 is a lot of couples, they talk about how much they love the honeymoon stage, or that, those first few months, or maybe six months to 7 months when somebody gets involved with each other. And, you find those few things that you just absolutely love about them. And then you're able to overshadow all the other shit. So for better or for worse, that happens because sometimes they're a hot mess, but you love this one thing. And so you have, rose-colored lenses on and you're able to see them in that place. But for the most part, what couples end up doing is they end up putting a halt on the honeymoon period because of this. We stop at a certain point praising and recognizing individuals for the things that we love about them, for the things that we appreciate about them, for the things that we really value about them. Because at some point in the dynamic, in that honeymoon period, our best representatives step down, right? And then our authentic, insecure, traumatized, scared selves step up to the plate. And once that happens, we now have a dependency that we've formed, because in the early stages of a relationship, you made me feel a certain way, or I made you feel a certain way. And so now I'm dependent on you to keep doing that. But this is the thing. Humans are unreliable and they're moving targets. So we can't ever rely on another person to constantly be the reason why we get to feel okay in the world. So in order, right, to kind of put a halt on this, we want to continue the practice of praise and recognition. We want to continue returning to self, doing self check-ins when we find ourselves entering some of those codependent patterns. And I know everybody uses that fucking term, and it's actually a trigger word for me. But codependency in a nutshell basically means this. In order for me to feel okay, you need to do something, right? Or I'm reliant on you to say something, do something, be something, so I can feel something in the world, right? So it's this idea that I've relinquished my control and I've placed the dependence on you for it to be okay in the world. And this could look like the form of compliments. This could look like the form of constantly needing to be there for you. This could look like, all sorts of physical, emotional, verbal recognition, whatever the case may be. And what we want to offer you is an opportunity that you can absolutely extend the honeymoon period. You could be in the honeymoon period for a lifetime marriage. And it really goes back to maintaining and committing to that focus of, I'm here to not only show up in my best, but I want to consistently offer praise and recognition to you for the ways that you're showing up brilliantly in this world, right? Versus the opposite of, now I'm going to have some expectations, look for the things that aren't working, start nitpicking, right? And start relinquishing my power more and more, and ultimately hold you responsible for my happiness. Even though that sounds crazy out loud, I can tell you that 99.9% of the couples that I work with in my private practice and that Ruby and I work with in Life Camp, that's what y'all are doing. So we just want to be really clear about it, that that's not going to work.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're talking now, we started with how trauma shows up in intimacy, and now we're on some of the biggest mistakes couples make in relationships because of this trauma intersection of who and how you are in the world, right? It's got these, now you're stuck in these repeat patterns. So if you found yourself, have you ever been in the same argument over and over and over and over, right? Oh, here we are, same argument. So I want to talk about one of the biggest mistakes people make is that relentlessly processing problems while you're still in that state of conflict, like in the middle of the argument, now you want to bring up this one thing. Oh yeah, and since we're here arguing, I want to tell you about the other shitty thing you did. And this wreaks havoc on relationships. It ruins trust. It ruins a sense of safety. It ruins vulnerability, right? It is so challenging. And in the moment, if you notice, right, when we get in these patterns, right, of really processing problems when we're still in the middle of conflict, now we start to bring up all the problems. And pretty soon I have this huge, like, bag of shit that I'm carrying into the relationship in the now. Some of maybe it's 15 years ago if you've been in a long-term relationship, right? Or maybe it's from your past relationships. You're just like so-and-so, they always did this, right? So when we relentlessly process problems in a state of conflict, it completely undermines our relationships. It undermines the love, the trust, the appreciation, the gratitude. It undermines the ability to repair and to reconnect. And so what this does is it's like, it's just slowly whittling away at whatever stability has been created in the relationship. And it often, even just something as small as this, as processing problems when you're in the midst of conflict, can erode away a relationship and be the thing that eventually breaks it apart. So this is something we want to not do and pause from doing. And at this point, I just want you to start to notice, like, oh my gosh, here I am. Like all the times you want to process, I want you to think to yourself, where am I? Like, am I in conflict? Am I angry? Like, how do I feel right now? Am I super upset? And if you're upset or you're angry or you're stressed out or you're overwhelmed or you're feeling insecure, this is not the time to process the conflict and to process in the argument. This is a time to step away and take time for you.
All right. And then the next couple. We also know that when we assume, and this is a little bit, I already kind of highlighted it, but when we assume the other person is responsible for our safety, our self-esteem, AKA our overall well-being. So we hear this in the form, there's so much cultural normative rhetoric that's like, you're my rock, you're my other half, right? You're my ride or die. And let me tell you, that shit is antiquated as fuck, because you don't want to be that to anybody, because that is a really, really heavy responsibility. And not only is it heavy, it's impractical. And it also creates opportunities in the relationship for insecurity, breakdown, and just an overall sense of draining energy ultimately, because not only do you have to be responsible for yourself, but now you've put the expectation of having to be responsible for somebody else and vice versa. So we really want to step away from this sort of cultural norm that's been pushed over time in intimacy, that you know, they're supposed to be there for anything and everything. And this has been passed down for a variety of different reasons. We can look at the patriarchy, we can look at social infrastructures that really, really enforce this. But ultimately, it's a bad idea, and knock it off.
One piece I want to add to this, because I feel like it's super potent, is that when we assume someone else needs to be our rock or our other half, or like they're responsible for us to feel better, guess what we fucking give away every single time? Our personal power. We train ourselves not to have confidence, not to have reliability for self, not to be able to show up fully in the world, right? We're putting that on someone else needing to show up instead. So it can be so detrimental on so many levels. So I really want to encourage you to, again, we're telling you the 5 things that are the pretty big mistakes in relationships, and we want you to start to look at, like, have some curious eyes here, like look at your things in curiosity, and don't feel bad about this. Just be like, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm noticing it. Noticing it is half the battle. And honestly, this is big work. We created a whole entire program called Life Camp that helps people heal and integrate trauma so they can own the shit out of their lives and start having really incredible relationships and up-leveling in so many levels, because it feels so much better to be all in yourself, in your agency, in your power, authentically you in the world, than it does to be interacting in relationships through old trauma and chronic stress and adversity.
One of the greatest things that we highlight in Life Camp is what we call discovering your blueprint. And that's really an opportunity in a nutshell where you get to examine and uncover and unearth why the fuck you do what you do in your intimacy. Like, what unconscious needs are you constantly trying to get met? So this looks at, like, what are the trends, what are the themes that show up in your relationship? Again, why is it, with all the awareness in the world, why do you keep doing what you do, and why do you keep ending up at square one? And it's not because you're stupid, and it's not because you're crazy, and it's not because you're not equipped at healing. It just means that you haven't quite gathered the right tools, and perhaps haven't figured out that energetic signature, that specific piece of information that really helps you deepen your understanding as to why you are showing up in the world that you are. And once you have that information, then that paves the road for you to be able to rewrite an entirely new story around your intimacy. So I don't care what your background is, where you come from, what you've been modeled, you absolutely have the opportunity to show up and become something different based on not only awareness, but really simple practices that help you pivot into a whole new way of being in the world. A couple other things that we want to just go over too in terms of mistakes is, again, creating expectations and ultimatums. And we can do a whole video on this, and maybe we will actually. Expectations, like I said in the beginning, basically they set people up for failure. Basically it says, if you don't do this, you're screwed, right? And ultimatums put people in a fight or flight response, and nobody wants to experience that. So we really encourage people, instead of creating expectations and ultimatums, we really encourage more or less to create sacred agreements. And this is absolutely something that we cover in our programming together. And we help couples and we help individuals understand what that looks like, not only to be in relationship with self, but in relationship in a healthy way with others.
Awesome. The last one is blaming, right? So I want to think about, just take a moment. You can close your eyes. You can think back. When's the last time you blamed your partner or someone in your relationship for something that's not working, or you wanted them to change so you could feel better, right? So when's the last time you're like, oh, it's your fault I'm not having a good day, or it's your fault I'm this, or it's your fault, right? Anytime we blame other, this is like, we just went through the 5 top mistakes, right? And this is the last of those 5. And it's really like looking at how blame is another one of those things that it's not only is it a mistake in your relationship, it will eat away at your relationship, and it will ultimately like cause demise in relationships, like needing someone to be different than they are so you can feel better, and blaming someone for things that are going wrong, instead of taking that mirror, looking inside, and really doing some work here. And so these are really deep subjects, and we want to go on here because we get a lot of questions, and we want to address some of them head on. And before I take the next step, one of the things I want to tell you all is we actually have a private training coming up, and it's a free training. There's an application for it, and it's actually how to ditch trauma so that you can start creating a life worth obsessing about. And it's going to be a super in-depth training where we really want to go into some of this big work that we do, because we know how important it is. And we know, like, when you're stuck in the cycles of relationship drama, that shit takes away your creativity. It takes you, like, not sleeping well. It, like, wreaks havoc on so many layers of your life. And there is so much relief and hope that comes from healing at a deeper level. And we're not talking about, like, healing like, okay, now we're going to walk you through rehashing your life from, like, 1980, and we're going to take a flashlight, we're going to, like, shine the light on, and you're going to relive all this pain. No, like, none of that. This is not about rehashing the past. This is, like, the intersection of brain science, neuroscience, and trauma-informed coaching and healing. So it's like taking these two pieces, melding them together in this beautiful thing so that you can heal and integrate and ultimately own your power without having to navigate a bunch of shit and, like, working through your painful past in a super negative way.
We're really committed and we're really focused, both as people from harm reduction and also people that are, you know, dedicated to trauma-informed work. We are firm believers that you do not need to be re-victimized or re-traumatized or rehash just about anything in order to start healing. That's pretty much the magic of living in 2022 at this point, and thanks to the advancements in neuroscience. So there's no better time than to be, you know, addicted, traumatized, or have a sense of brokenness, because we can correct all that shit. So you're winning at life in that sense. All right, so we have four quick things rather that we're just going to bullet point. And again, this is something that we really offer around things that you can help to do right now in your relationship to create some healing, create some space, and really some expansion on steps on what to do in terms of next steps. So number one, above and beyond anything else, right? Commit to your own personal work. Like, there's no sidestepping this. There's no easy pill to take around this. Like, when individuals enter any sort of intimacy, they need to be doing their own work. And so we're not looking at entire independence, and we're not looking at codependence. We're looking at the concept of interdependence. And in order to achieve that is when you're showing up and being accountable for your own growth process.
I also want to real quick debunk the myth that personal work actually has to be work or hard or gnarly or, like, oh, it takes so much time. Like, personal work can be fun. And ultimately, you should actually get a lot of joy and satisfaction from the work you're doing. This is what's going to make it last, and it's what's going to make it worthwhile. So if you're not enjoying the personal work, let's find some personal work that you do enjoy.
Absolutely. And so we also encourage you, whether you work with us, you work with another therapist, a coach, a program, you read a book, we don't care, but figure out a way through specific agreements where you can make a container that facilitates a dynamic that becomes a corrective relationship. And what we mean by that is that the person that you're engaged with, the person that you're having this intimacy with, ultimately becomes a safe partnership. Because when you are engaging in a safe partnership, you now create the opportunity for healing. That's actually at the core of what human connection is all about. We are a social species. So even though you may have been at some point in time harmed by someone and it's caused you trauma and it's caused you distrust, etc., the other beautiful part is that human connection can also be the very thing that heals you. So however you come about finding it, again, whether it's through Life Camp, it's through us, or you find another person or another group of people to do it with, look towards creating opportunities for dynamics to be corrective relationships.
Okay. One of the biggest ones, and I want to drive this one home for things you can do to help right now, is shift your attention to appreciation. If you just do this one thing, shifting to appreciation, meaning go back to that honeymoon phase in your relationship, even in your friendships. I challenge you with your friendships, with your kids if you have them, with your loved one, with your people at work. Really prioritize appreciating the other person. Shift your attention to showing appreciation for little things, the things you might have forgotten about, the things you take for granted, and start appreciating them. You can do it in your head, but it's even more potent if you start doing it out loud to the other person, and talk about what you want, not what you don't want. We're so good at saying, like, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to show up like that. Instead, I want to hear, like, what do you want, right? Say what you want instead of what you don't want, and really start showing that appreciation. And ultimately in all of this, like, if you shift you, that's what matters right now. It's not about the other person changing. It's about what you can do, where your personal power and your agency lies is right here with you.
Absolutely. I love that part. And that goes back to, ultimately, if you want your relationship to change, only one person needs to change in order for that to happen. So that's also the really cool part about this. And then last but not least, this is more important. And as a New Yorker and an Italian, this comes very natural to me, but I know that this isn't easy for everyone. Practice clear and direct communication. You have to get out of the mindset around they should have known. That mindset of like, they should have known that I liked this. They should have known that I've wanted that. They should have known I wanted to go there. Nobody's a fucking mind reader. And actually, human beings are so overly bombarded in this modern day society and so overstimulated. Our mental real estate is so exhaustingly occupied. So constantly having to be in the know of what everyone wants around us is difficult and it's tiresome. And so for the purpose of keeping your sanity and the purpose of avoiding assumptions and the purpose of avoiding or mitigating drama, be clear in your communication. Practice direct communication. Practice being direct in terms of your desires, your wants, your needs, and watch what shows up. Really, this is all wonderful opportunities, not to be perfect, but just, once again, opportunities to practice doing something different. And that's really what Ruby and I ask for in terms of a requirement with working with us. We never ask for permission. I mean, not permission, perfection. But what we do ask for is a willingness to show up and do something different in the face of doing the same shit over and over and over again throughout your past. So it just takes a little bit of an opportunity to say, you know what, this time I'm going to say this differently, or this time I'm going to take a pause, or this time I'm going to shift my focus over here. These little simple moves actually have profound effects, both on your relationship to self and your relationship to others.
If you want to know, and if you're here and you're kind of like, whoa, mind blown, or you want more steps, or now you're like, wait, I need to take this further. This is a little bit confusing. I need more understanding. Or maybe you're just like lit up and this totally spoke to you. We are doing a private training next Tuesday. We're accepting applications for it right now. The private training is absolutely free. We are going to go into how to ditch trauma and create a life worth obsessing about from our specific trauma-informed approach. That is our signature thing. It's Life Camp, and it's what we do. We totally love this, and we'd love to invite you. So the link is in both of our bios. I'm at the Ruby Christine, and this is my co-founder, Star Rose Bond, and you can find us on Instagram. We would love to have you join our private training. This is like just a little dip in the bucket of what's to come. And if you have any questions, you can absolutely direct message Star. She is our person to answer all questions and go there with you. So if you've been here and you're like, wait, I need more information, or like, hold on, then please go ahead and message Star, and she'll get to you. And you can also find that application to our live private training next Tuesday. There will be a recording. All you have to do is apply. It's 3 really simple questions. We just want to get it going. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was really awesome to see you here. I appreciate the comments, and we look forward to, we're going live again on Friday, this Friday at a certain time.
I'm feeling inspired to go sooner now, so who knows? But definitely.
We might be live every day this week, really going deep on some of this Life Camp stuff, because we're excited about it, and we know that everyone should have access to healing. We really believe in that. And so here we are, sharing our best with you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Hey, it's Ruby. Now we want to hear from you. What's one insight or action you're taking away from today's episode of Life Camp TV? Put that in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. While you're at it, if you liked this video, go ahead and click like. You can subscribe for future updates or save it for later. Share with a friend. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Life Camp TV.